Today's lecture begins with a model of Notre Dame de Paris, which will eventually we'll take a look at the floor plan type and then move into 3D perspective from a bridge to the south side of the Parvis corner of Notre Dame where it meets the public place, and the mass will move back towards the transept shown here, and we'll see a little bit of the apse in that perspective. Notre Dame, of course, is the center, the heart of Paris, arguably the heart of France as well. Today's figures show that maybe 90 million people visit France every year, and 30 to 35 million of those people enter Notre Dame. So a lot of those tourists might be going to other towns in France, but when they come to Paris, they certainly go to Notre Dame, and they find a spectacle of Gothic architecture, where we'll see what in the process of moving from the early Romanesque churches to the late Romanesque to the early Gothic, where Notre Dame starts, by the time they finish over the course of a couple centuries, they've completed the first holistic view of the flying buttresses to structure the height of these ever-growing Gothic cathedrals. So in 1163, the work begins. And it was Maurice de Sully who decided in 1160 to replace the complex of the old remains that were on site there with a second basilica. The history of Notre Dame encompasses several centuries. It's very complicated, and a few benchmark dates are there. In 1163, we start. So in this model, we see the standard of what happens in all Christian churches at the time at this scale, and certainly at Notre Dame and the ones that follow after it. Cruciform in plan again, with an east to west orientation and a crossing here between the public aspect of the nave leading to the choir and the ambulatory around it. So that radiation we saw in the earlier 1140 structure at Saint Denis is eminent here, but on a larger scale. And so each significant Gothic structure after this will be larger in scale, in breadth, and in height, more importantly in height. So the language of Gothic architecture is about the structural innovation, to be able to peel away the mural quality of the Romanesque and add in the delicacy of the structure of, in this case, the flying buttresses. We see a whole series that wrap around that nave. So the view we're going to look at today, once we're done with the plan type, as we rotate this around to get to a point where we see, from our vantage point, the perspective will be at eye height right about here, about 5 feet high. That'll move all the way across the back of it. And so the bulk of the building will be above our horizon line and very little bit beneath us. So we'll start that sketch way at the bottom of the page here and complete that to show the massing of the component parts of the cathedral. So much like the churches we've seen so far, the first we can start the floor plan is that center axis that moves from east to west and has that configuration of the Christian faith of how they want to articulate the daily mass, and how there's an order and device in terms of the plan type being systematic. And so the public access is here for the daily masses, be them at the dawn, break of day when the sun rises, or the setting sun for the evening mass after the work in the fields. Comes to the public aspect of the nave and the side aisles. So there could be even a day when you visit where there's people in a service in the center spine of it, and yet tourism or pilgrims for the faithful relics moving around the ambulatory, the outside and the side aisles. And as they grow in size, the nave will change in dimension here, so it goes wider here. It also gets taller. At future cathedrals we'll take a look at in model form towards the end of today. And the aisles might even develop into twin side aisles, so there'd be capacity to have multiple exchanges of people across the periphery of the church. Notre Dame is referred to as a fairly masculine church, where it's not that ornate. It's sort of coming out of late Romanesque into early Gothic, so it's got more of a mural quality to it. But you'll see the delicacy changes as we get to the outside structure, which comes to support the fly of the actual interior space through the buttresses later on. So we'll start over here on the west. We have the same type of configuration we saw at earlier churches, where these bell towers would have a significant impact on that western face, and then break into a trisect of opening, opening, and opening to move into space. And the hierarchy is this the one for ceremonial openings. And now even today, the tourists circulate in one door and come out the other. So more of the day-to-day activities happen in the secondary doors. And we won't be able to see in our sketch some of the details of the facade, but this works as really an ornamental graphic book of the stories from the Bible. Much like the stained glass, when you come inside the actual stained glass are figurines and details from different chapters of the Bible and verse, so that people see a visual image of the written word that maybe they couldn't handle back then because the bulk of computing was probably illiterate. So they see that in sculptural store on the outside, they see it in the glass on the inside. So the building itself is a bit of a story. It's an unfolding of ideas through graphic ideas, two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. So as you march through here, there'll be a series of columnar types that dedicate toward the theatrics of that nave. So the intersection of the lines that are kind of sketched out in your paper so far, we see the spine and structure of a Gothic cathedral kind of taking effect. And then when it comes to the crossing, that's where we find the biggest opening, the biggest vessel of open space of that crossing moving across, so that we'll find a greater thrust of the arches above in the nave and in the transept. So these are key axis points there, where all of a sudden the vertical elements coming up are probably at their thickest for the entire cathedral, because you've got both the east and west meeting the north and south. So there's a pretty strong configuration there. And then these keep coming around then until they hit that hemispherical circular transition into the apse, the ambulatory that comes around the choir in the back of the church, or the east end of the church. And those wings radiate out along that arc, like we saw at Saint Denis with that new potential with the pointed arch to be able to encapsulate structure over an irregular type of floor plan that you wouldn't see in Romanesque architecture. And that skin comes all the way out to the outside and eventually has a setting then for the structure that supports the inner supports that go all up to the higher supports and the church that rises up above us. There's a touchdown here outside. So the whole notion is, as this drives up, and the more we reach from the earthly to the heavenly up above, the architecture peels away and becomes more light and delicate. So as we rise up, there's more and more light forced through the windows between the architecture. And as it goes up, it becomes very fragile and very weak per its square footage of planes of space that's building up. So it constantly wants to push, as the weight bears down, it wants to push the structure out and make it fail and collapse. So the notion that is to come from the points outside and then throw weight back at the building. And we'll see that when we into the sketch here of the flying buttresses, then basically turning a space that is rectangular and tall into something that's pyramidal by throwing architecture back at the orthogonal place of the nave on the inside. So continuing with the components here, today we find in the North Tower, the rise takes us up past the King's Gallery, up into the secondary upper gallery, and then you'll cross over to the South Tower, which houses the bell for Emmanuel, which is one of the reasons why Notre Dame is in good condition today, because Victor Hugo in the 19th century wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which built a medieval story around the vessel of Notre Dame as a spiritual center for the city of Paris, and got the Parisians, worldwide people as well, to bring a claim back to Notre Dame. And so that started the restoration process for Villaduc, and in a sense saved the building for posterity. So when I mentioned masculine before, it has a very limited sense of a transept, in that some churches will make this much more pronounced and they'll push the volume out to the north and to the south, whereas Notre Dame's plan is very sort of modest and controlled by the overall shape of this long longitudinal body and the apse and ambulatory on the end. So on one end is the cloister portal, on the south end is the portal of Saint Etienne, and in front are the three portals of entry and egress, one the portal of the Virgin, one the portal of the Last Judgment, and one the portal of St. Anne. And just as we connect back to an earlier sketch, St. Anne has got the actual statue beneath it, as the statues again tell stories of Saint Denis holding his head in his hand after the decapitation of martyrdom back on Montmartre, back in the 3rd century. So now we can push to what will be a very difficult sketch because it's a monumental building. It's got a lot of detail to it. So we're going to work slowly through some component, just geometric masses first, and then we'll layer in the architecture inside of it. So as I mentioned before, we're going to look from at grade. We're not going to go up in the air and try to look down on it. We're going to look right at the grade. So from here, we're looking down. And so the horizon line is up where our eyes are, well above the structure. As we tilt it up, the horizon line drops until finally we get to a point where the bulk of the building is above our horizon line. And we're looking at it from just about this angle where it seems flat at the base, but we'll see a little bit of a movement from the corner up to the horizon line, and then from this corner up to the horizon line back here. So I'll show that within the base tick marks here, that we're going to come to a point of right about this level where we can draw that line all the way across, just for the mechanics of sketching, that we know we're going to throw lines from the boxing out of the building back down this horizon line, because all horizontal lines will converge either to the left vanishing point or to the right vanishing point. So in this case, we'll simply go to the top of our front box. So we're going to consider this whole mass of the 2 towers up above and the 3 portals down below as a big orthogonal rectangular box that rises up. And so the top corner that we're going to look at from our vantage point here, and here's a person, for instance, with their head right at the base of Notre Dame proper. That's about the scale of the architecture. And this might be a person that's much closer to us, looking at it from maybe across the river. And so it's a massive piece of masonry architecture on the edge of the Seine River there on the Isle of the Ile-de-la-Cité. So they're both looking up at this. From our vantage point, we started this, and this box is going to have a top to it. And the top isn't flat, even though it's flat in elevation here. As soon as we get in perspective, it starts to tip back to a right vanishing point. So once we use that line, this one's going to follow back so that we know somewhere off the page, this line and this line meet. And that's where all of our horizontals running east-west are going out and meet at a point over there. So that point is actually off the page. So sometimes it's hard to understand. You want to throw all those horizontals to the same line off the page, even though they're parallel in real life. The way the human eye sees, they vanish to a point. So this part of the box, when we come to the front, goes back. This is thrown to one point to the right. This is thrown to one point to the left. So this is going to come down much more acutely to a point that's just about on our page, a little bit off to the left. But it's much closer, as you can see. And so all of our horizontals along our sketch are going to rush back to that point too. So whenever they come to the corner of our box, they're going to turn. So that's the horizontal rising up, and the horizontal turns and goes back to the right point. And that's how we'll control our masses here. So at the base of the church, we want to come to the front corner here, because this is the closest piece of architecture to us now if we're standing about this distance away from that corner. We're going to drop that line down. And like we mentioned before, it's not actually purely vertical. It's not going to match the grid of the paper, for instance. It's going to match the movement of a line that's going to go up to yet another vanishing point because it's so tall. When you draw buildings that are so tall compared to the human height, the vertical lines actually converge on a point that are well off the page. So the corner of this block, the corner of this block, and the edge over here are all rushing up to a point up in the sky. So if we drew them actually perpendicular to the paper, and we married them to the line of the grid of the paper, we'd sort of flatten it out and make it more of an abstract drawing. So to keep it in real space, the top of this rectangle is here, and it drops down angular down to the grade about there. So follow those little tick marks. This one comes down, follows right about here. And now it comes to a point where it exceeds our height and actually goes beyond the height of our eye. So this one will show the grade a little bit deeper down by our feet, and then come back to that left vanishing point and rush back. This one actually will come down by our feet and rush back to the right vanishing point. So a little bit of the architecture actually drops beneath our eye level. And that gives that scale of it hitting the ground and then having a force of the earth coming out this way. And so what we'll do, just to kind of expose that, is we'll bring a line from that left vanishing point here, one from the front of the cathedral here, one over here coming off that point. So in a sense, kind of quickly, we've drawn a bit of a sidewalk, maybe a road, a walkway next to the cathedral. So the mass of the monument comes down and stops. We stopped it by shifting from a vertical plane to a horizontal plane. So that's the Western Block, which is the mural part that's coming from its residency in Romanesque architecture, the early Christian. That's the frontal piece. It's almost, in early days, it's almost sort of castle-like and fortified, because the church is a place of harbor, safe harbor for people who are under siege. You can have sanctuary within that, as a story from Quasimodo asking sanctuary within the bishop's province inside the cathedral. So that block is satisfied here. Now we want to do is simply drawing the block of the nave. And that's a rotation of the same type of massive rectangle, but now it's perpendicular to this. And the top of that piece starts right about here and drives back toward that vanishing point. So you can see now the horizontal line, the top of the nave, the top of the frontispiece here, all eventually come down and touch at a point off the page to the right. So we've established that at the base. It's also the same type of thing. It's going to rush back right around the corner of this and eventually almost kiss the horizon line, so that the bulk of this, before we get to the transept, goes from here to the crossing and then back. And so we'll see the transept kind of kick out a little bit. So we'll draw that back and we'll draw this line down. And so now we have the body of the cathedral. And then we have the edge of the transept, which will be at this line, and that'll drop down. And then we'll have a little bit from this viewpoint. The person standing here, look at this corner. As they look down this way in the same drawing, past the transept, we're not going to see too much of the apse here because it's moving away from us. So in this particular sketch, it might be as little as this coming down to the grade beyond it. So a lot of the architecture keeps going, but it's foreshortened because it's farther afield and it's getting diminished by our perspective line. So beyond that transept coming back, that's about as much as we see. So in order to now see the top of that point there, we're going to rush back to the left vanishing point from this point. So we're going to project back to here off the page, and that will stop at a certain point to see the top of the nave. So that's actually the wall of the nave, and here's the corner of this piece popping out, and this being almost outdoor air structure of stone being thrown against the nave inside. So the piece up here is actually the crowning element of the roof that comes down as a sort of a pediment top. It's a throw that at the top crown of the roof here, it will go down in this direction as well as go down in this direction. So it's shedding all the waters and the limited snow they have year round to get the moisture off the building and then taking off the sides of the building. So when that piece of the crossing tower, and we can see we've got an angle here, which is going to show the top of that sort of pedimental throw. So that triangle sits on top of this piece and goes through the architecture. It has a mirrored triangle on that side. So when that comes back, again, it's a horizontal line. It'll meet the top of this roof line and project back. So it stops here. So now we know between this face of that coming down east and west now, and this face going north and south creates a little bit of a change in direction. So 90 degrees away from each other are these two plates of structure on top of the nave and then the transept. So we've got part A, the massive mural wall facing west. You've got the nave of the church meeting the transept, and we've got a little bit of projection from a viewpoint of the ambulatory apse poking out beyond the edge of the transept here. So we can continue this line kind of through there until it completes itself. So that's basically in perspective the throws of the biggest principles we've seen in plan type over here. So that's the A part, the nave, the B, and finally the apse and ambulatory. So now it's a matter of coming into the sketch and trying to articulate the development, how that's held up. Because in scale wise, this nave is much larger than Saint Denis, for instance, in terms of verticality. And again, as you take that same stone off the face of the earth and take it further and further off, that distance of D makes that equation for the physics and structures of this much more pronounced. So what they learned to do here, the sort of innovation beyond the pointed arch, which was established at Saint Denis, is as the structure goes up, you counter that again with this idea of having a counter throw. So again, graphically, the nave is moving up off the earth and the force is pushing out where the top of the nave meets its structure. It's trying to ruin the structure and have gravity, make the architecture fail. So the architects realized that the key aspect isn't so much to just throw dead weight at it and have more and more stone, because it makes the building incredibly massive and even heavier and more expensive because of all the stone. They realized the architecture is more about lines and points rather than just planes. So can you then look at this as almost a structural diagram? As long as you take the weight of the building back through these points, instead of the actual walls themselves, we see in these towers here, you can actually create this diaphragm. It's almost like looking as a bird cage, where it can almost feel like it's open air. In order to counteract the idea of the scale of this once it gets so tall, you then take the principle of projecting off on an angle and then putting weight against that, and then projecting off on an angle and putting weight against that, and then projecting off, so that basically what you're doing, you're stepping down almost in the form of a pyramid, and then you'll counterbalance when you come to your structure and add the weight needed that wholly supports up all the lineal patterns inside the space proper. And of course, we've seen in our sketch early from Saint Denis that the nave is sort of the inside shell structure that we see, but there's a massive timbered roof in there to keep that lightweight before it's cladded in the metal, in this case, lead skin that finishes the top of the cathedral. So part of that principle too, if this is all the interior space, now we've got this diaphanous, lightweight flying buttress system that supports that open volume there and goes back to nature's strongest platonic shape, the triangle, because it's the most equilibrium-based type of structure where it takes the most amount of energy to make it fail. So you go beyond that fail point and you've got something that's rigid and can survive, in this case, since 1163. So we'll go back to the major tower here, and even that has elements where they're trying to define a way of supporting its growth, because in plan it looks like it's a simple box. But what happens as it comes down, it breaks out and actually establishes a bit of a growth in terms of the supports getting larger and broader at the base. So it's got sort of a little bit of an essence of pushing the stone back toward the center of this box on the outside edges. So we can look for that at the top, flaring out some more. And then that is actually faced with a thickness to that, as we see on this elevation, where those shapes of growth are by these large corner conditions that hold the edges of our monolith, so to speak. So we'll see the front edge of it over here, but we'll see the actual sort of mass of it at this corner. And that builds up to frame this idea that the outside skin of this is doing the structural work, and they can make the inside idea a bit more open-aired and lighter as it moves up stage by stage. So for instance, down here between these massive leaning piers that support the weight, this one kind of comes up to a certain point and stops. Once they stop, they can come up to this part of the architecture and start to open up ideas of movement of air and light into the space. And on the next level up here, all the way toward the top, they articulate the way the sound from the bell tower will resonate through the cathedral proper into the streets of Paris. So as you move up, even in sort of the Romanesque or early Gothic prominence here, is they had an identity that as you move up, you try to eliminate the actual mural quality of the stone, so it becomes the most diaphanous at the top, which makes it less of a structural burden on the cathedral. And that's more impactful when you come to the nave, because there's where you want that southern light. So the sun rises here, but this is the southern face of it, cloaks the whole interior with light coming through the stained glass throughout the day. So they're twin towers. So the tower sits on this part and this part, rises up, and then has a gap between them. So we'll come and define those two towers. One ends and one starts. And then above the arches here on the first floor, there's sort of the galleries that lead into the space. Kind of do an idea for those three portals under three great arches. They create, really, when you approach Notre Dame, it's really an impressive movement, because even though you're brought into the language of the sculptures that kind of cloak these galleries and the idea of what's up in the portal above the door proper, the actual door is probably well down here, but this is all sort of sculptural artifact telling the story of different parts of the components of the Bible. When you come into these, this is so deep and so rich, it's almost like going into a room and you don't even enter the cathedral yet. They're not as if the doors on the outside skin, the doors are well in sort of a whole interior environment. So you're received by the structure, even though you're still in the outdoor weather. And at the top of those, we discussed earlier, like at other cathedrals, in this case, there's the King's Gallery, which comes across. We'll do a little quick sort of diagram of the sculptural pieces of the kings of Judea that rise up. And then shortly after that, again, all these horizontals coming back to that same point down here. In the center of this, between those two towers, we've got, if you draw a box first, it's a little bit easier. In the center of this, if you bisect the box and find the four cardinal points of left, right, top, and bottom, you'll know you can then inscribe a circle in perspective that has to touch just those 4 points. And that's to the glory of Mary here, because this is Notre Dame de Paris. And at this time, by the 1130s, 40s, 60s, into the 13th century too, there's a great cult of the Virgin Mary that becomes more proliferate with her image. And that's why many cathedrals across France are referred to as Notre Dame. So the Gothic Arc of Ile-de-France surrounds the whole region in the 12th century. Incredible intricate forms we'll see in other churches kind of spread across Western Europe. Gothic, again, is a term from the Italian Renaissance. It's looking back, sort of historically referred to the style of the Goths, the Germanic peoples, who had destroyed the classical culture of the Roman Empire. So it was sort of, in a sense, when the Renaissance wanted to sort of be a little more pejorative with the language, they referred to it as more of a barbaric look. And yet, obviously, today it's celebrated as one of the greatest pieces of Western culture and history. The typical things we've seen so far and drawn are the groin vaults, which we saw on the interior of Saint Denis, which are going to be used here as well. The rose windows, the pointed arches, the flying buttresses, and the lovely stained glass that tell the stories. Moving up from here, then we get to the King's Gallery eventually, which is the base of the two towers here. Excuse me, not the King's Gallery, the Grand Gallery up above. So there's segments here telling that kind of open book story to the people in the parvis, the place out front. So out here, that's been excavated in the restoration process over the years of Notre Dame. They've actually then uncovered the footings and the bastions for the basilica that preceded Notre Dame. And so basically they've made beneath this open space in Paris now in the front of the cathedral, so over here on the left, it's sort of a sunken museum to the actual Ile de Cité in times during Notre Dame and before Notre Dame. What's also nice is when you come up to the gallery up here and look back down, they've created the stone walk out front in the parvis, and they've labeled the actual footprints of how close the housing was back when Notre Dame was a cathedral. So we see it as you approach it now from quite a distance, about a mile away, you turn a corner and Notre Dame is very prominent. It's the tallest building in the district and one of the tallest buildings in all of central Paris to this day. And yet in medieval life, the culture would have been so dominating with bringing housing to the foothold, because this was beyond a mass. It was the spiritual center. It was also a bit of a fortress to cloak the people in safety. So buildings are built very close to it. As mentioned before, there would have been steps up to the cathedral that have now been lost because the city of Paris has built up vertically over the years to create more subterranean space and sewer systems and things like that. So now we're going to push back from this sort of early part, which is as they start from the early part of the choir, then they build this, then you kind of build the pieces together with the nave. It's a fairly quick build in terms of most cathedrals. Some are longer than others, and sometimes the detail comes at the end. So as we push through this, we want to make sure we're going to hold on to 7 of these buttresses that are on the side. They come out and they support their top unit here of the height of the nave on the inside. And that's where the pressure is coming out. So almost like today's mathematical computer generated graphics that show exactly where the structural forces are, these are sort of literal diagrams of how you can control nature in terms of how she performs on the site. So it's driven out the height, it's received by a vertical thrust back, the weight that's bearing down on that. But then you also want to, in a sense, keep it open so you can light the lower levels. So not just the upper gallery, but also get light into the lower side chapels. So these come out one more time, and then they drop down to these more massive piers that are now pulled out to this edge of space. So this whole condition is actually exterior that's supporting this. So we'll drive these down. I'm going to stop right here with this silhouette, because that actually happens to be a sort of administrative residential building for the people that ran the site, the clergy, that was built by the Duke to bring some spaces that's more ecumenical or based around the church, but not part of the church proper. And so that came from the part of the 19th century and has sort of the typical trappings of a kind of a neo-medieval building, as Villaduc saw it back then. So that'll stop us from seeing the final buttresses there. Now, to make those really seem like they're holding up interior space, we're going to go ahead and drop down the windows that would have been seen, the big flying arches up here that are behind those. And we'll just kind of hint at those arches showing, just so we get a sense that that's where the light is coming in from the south side all day. And that's a great spectacle when it's a bright sunny day pervading the cathedral. And there'll probably be something from the top gallery space, and that'll continue down here to lower lighting too. We'll just kind of strike through that quickly. So again, the idea is to make this as diaphanous and open air as possible to sit on that site. So it comes down, it comes to this cruciform plan, and obviously the architecture moved to the south and moved to the north. And so the architecture builds out. So we have that crossing again of Christ on the cross, and that's the sanctity of the inner chamber where the sacraments take at the high altar. So at our top of our transept, we'll simply try to draw a square in perspective here. And then that too will also then house a circle that comes out and touches at those key points. And that's the really elegant south rose window, which is much more massive in scale than this and receives better light. This receives extraordinary light at one part of the day, but this receives light sort of all day long from the course of sunrise to sunset. So the twin to on the north is less impressive because that's seen sort of ambient light, where this is sort of really a workforce. And so when it streams into space, it's a very sort of religious moment for a lot of people to see that for the first time. So to kind of get a hint at that, that can come from different periods of time by the time you actually get the detail of that. But typically there are panels within this which relate to significant numbers within the Bible. So that the numerology and the stories taught in those is specific in telling not just a nice visual graphic, but telling emotive qualities to the language of the Christian faith at the time. So it's kind of hinted that idea inside that. And of course, there's things that Villaduc would have done to restore, and sometimes he amplified the kind of medieval qualities of architecture where he brought in and had the building restored in the 19th century. And one point that people argue about is that he came in and put a more flamboyant type of crossing spire that maybe wasn't even part of the original church, but now it's being restored to that because now historians believe that his work in the 19th century should be restored. So the next thing we're drawing is actually the pinnacle of the fire from 2019. So the greatest amount of damage happened right at this crossing. And so we see the height of that flesh, as it's called, the crossing tower right here on this point, which ends up being throwing its supports back to the major piers here. So that comes down like a reverse knife onto this corner and then settles in and then drapes down on the sides here and gets its support by that crossing. So it steps up, and as it moves around, it crenellates, it stages. And once it gets beyond the two kind of necks for it, it then becomes more lace-like and opens up so that you can actually see light through it, and it's more open air. And then there is the very light and delicate metal roof on top of that. With little details on the outside skin, which again, this is just truly from the imagination of the studies of Villaduc and his concept of medieval light, even though it's from almost 200 years ago now. And that's the crossing spire here. And so sometimes you'll see that in the French aspect, kind of highlighting that this is the sacred part of the church down below. You'll see in British architecture, it becomes much more a dominant piece than the front towers. They wanted to make one massive tower at the crossing. So the language between the French and English don't go the same path of Gothic in terms of the overall massing and diagramming of what the church is about. So now to make this, because these are all vertical planes moving up, to make these look the diagonal they are because they're pitched roofs, we're going to come back in and take a diagonal approach to moving those metals along the ribs that will come down to that corner, and we'll turn it and come back this way. And that way you get a sense of that being moving in a different kind of direction in space on top of the cathedral. We'll do a little bit on the back here just to show how the throw actually becomes much more of a spectacle when you come to the apse. So they continue over here at that same height. There's one, two, probably one here. That final one that's going to come over here as it thrusts out and supports. And again, we're just coming down to a diagram to show the extension of this line going back. The last one comes out, and the throw is really sort of the most romantic because you have singular buttresses out in space by themselves. And so you get an idea that this happens. And then finally, the last one comes out even further, and you see that whole prosaic idea of that buttress kind of singular in space. And then they'll return and do multiple sets of those moving around that corner. So to see these orthogonal pieces kind of form a curve is really a gorgeous part of the frailty and yet the structural prowess of the Gothic language. So what we're going to do now to kind of move towards a development of the sketch as a whole, we're going to add some other site-based ideas that'll give some scale to this, and then we'll use some of the on-site vegetation, which will help kind of complete the sketch, and then we'll add some value, which will hopefully pull the sketch off the page a bit. So to give you an idea of Paris in terms as a city and a relative idea of how medieval sometimes in some towns gets absorbed by the growth of later centuries and buildings become taller and taller, and contemporary 20th century structures are much taller than these. Paris has a real strict about 7.5, 8 floor level across the entire city. So right across the street, where we do see architecture adjacent in this sketch to Paris, we can leave a little gap before we get to the corner, but really not much larger than the King's Gallery itself, being at 6 or 7 stories here. That's the corner of 19th century Paris rebuilding itself, the La Cité. And because it marries itself to the same perspective of this, the edge of those buildings go back down that street to the same vanishing point. So we can take them a block and then separate them in another block and then separate them in a block. So I just added about, 2 city blocks to the edge of Notre Dame. So you see, even today, it's a very imposing vertical structure next to contemporary Paris. So they haven't allowed for tall buildings, out of scale projects to diminish the importance of this on the Ile de la Cité. And they really held that true for the bulk of the city of Paris. More contemporary buildings are built outside the peripherique itself, that ring of Paris that's been established by fortified walls. They've allowed for contemporary growth of more modern cities kind of on the fringes now. So what also we're going to do to kind of give an aspect here, we'll take this road up to a certain point, and then right about here, we're going to break it back to the right vanishing point. Because this is a point on the actual sketch itself. We're right about at river's edge. So when we come to the river's edge, there's a wall to it that prevents people from not having protection from there. And so at this point, it starts to be the actual arcade of stonework that travels across the River Seine on both sides. So we can set that up here and here. The road continues, but there's that protection away from the river on both aspects. And that'll sort of sit the sketch down too, because it stops the eye from moving across the road this way. And now we're going to do a little bit of vegetation because this is a nice green space at the base. There's some more mature trees here. So all we have to do in terms of the sketch is kind of frame out an overall shape for those. And the rest is really hardscape up here because they want that pristine view of Notre Dame from the entire west elevation. And now wrap around towards the back idea, which actually has got more of a vegetated park on the east end of the church. And then the city itself then from this point continues because it's very dense. You don't leave too many open spaces in Paris because of the value of the property. So if you take this height here and we ran it all the way back to our right vanishing point, that's the same height of the city moving back across the river from Paris or in different parts of the Ile de la Cité. So we can break that and show the growth of blocks back there and change some of the heights. So that gives kind of the idea that this scale, even to this day, has this dominance on this site as you walk up from the south end. So now we'll move into a little bit of value to kind of claim the site now with some more definition. And so one thing you want to do right away is establish the sun's coming from the south end, which will mean all the western faces. If it's coming from the south, more like 10 in the morning, hasn't turned on this corner, all the western faces of our block will receive a little bit of a wash. So it makes them a darker tone than the rest of the building. So that'll be this side of the roof pitch, this side of our flesh, this side of the body of the church, this side of the body of the administrative building on site, and this side of our 2 twin towers. And just lightly kind of claim that for now at the side of the pencil. And we'll come back in and add more layers of development there. A little bit of a wash going down here on that side, so it seems like it's being lit on the south, but out on the west. And then we'll come into where all the vegetation was, and we'll sort of assign a deeper value for everything that's green during the summer. And not to make that the subject, they're just going to be sort of a graphic for trees and vegetation. But we're not going to take them all the way down to grade because this is a place where you can walk beneath it. There may be a little bit of shrubbery, but by and large, you're walking beneath the vegetation here because there's so many people on this site year round. So we'll just take us to this corner. And now we can drop down a couple of tree trunks kind of randomly to show that there's a myriad of different vegetation that all kind of climbs together and completes that space. Okay, our next step then is sort of claim the interior. That we, in a daylight structure, if you can see into an interior space, even a glimpse of that, it'll be a very dark space. Even though we think like glass is being bright, the dark space is a fraction of the lumens from the outside space. So any type of interiority seen would be much darker. So if we come up, for instance, to these lights up here, these cut throughs into an interior environment, they would go darker. Certainly up in the bell towers, that space inside there, that goes darker. These wrap around and there's twin things happening on both these towers, but we're not going to see much of them because of the angle of the perspective. We'll probably just see the line of them. Remember, the top of the arches have to vanish. So we'll do that twice there. And so now I'm seeing these, we know what those look like in real life, but they're not drawn to that type of detail, but that wraps around. We'll see a little bit of that dark with the Virgin Mary's halo and her crown of thorns here, so to speak, at that part. And then to push the cavernous architecture back in here, we're going to stop at the top of the arch and make sure that's darker and goes deep into the space. Kind of arc down there, because that receives the least amount of light, because if the sun comes around and starts to light that, it's going to light the bottom of the arch and the portal itself before it lights the top. And that'll help create a base there. We also want to identify that this is really brightly lit stone, and this is sort of a patinaed metal roof. And so to differentiate that, we're going to go ahead and cloak that with a tone. And then I'll come over here and wrap at this point. And then when these piers come out, I drew sort of the shape of the pier coming down. We actually see the west face of that as it opens up. It starts as a very thin pier and gets broader. So that structure of that west side comes out and we see more of that as it steps around. So we'll be able to cloak that edge and a little bit of that shadow line for those piers that support these corner towers, just to get the essence of the weight of the stone itself. So now what we want to do is simply return the exact same process we did and do more of the same and less of the area. So for instance, to make these trees not look like they're flat, we know that the tree itself will cast shadows and create shade within the tree, and that's at the bottom third. So do the same thing with the bottom third of each tree as we move across. And that'll make them seem a little bit more three-dimensional and create space beneath them on the site here. And so the same is true of Notre Dame, is that to pull it off its page, we want to make sure that whenever there's an edge of a line against space behind it, we make that a stronger line so we get the structure to pull off the paper and have more three-dimensional quality to it. So for instance, a line here keeps its sort of dimension and depth at this level because it's not really defining space in this wall because the wall's there. This line, however, has got a line of space beyond that around the corner, so it has to develop to something much more dominant on the paper. So we can come sort of to this point on this edge and just kind of draw out some of the detail of that edge and make that just a sharper construct. And then I'll pull that off of that background. We won't do the same for these because we want them to remain in the background. We'd love to have this edge come closer to us. And that'll wrap around at the height of this tower. And actually at this corner, there's another rounded turret that was added on. So we'll see that as a difference maker. They're not actually idealistically twin, but they're close to it. And then it comes down here in front of this space. So that line will be darker. Up top, it crenellates a little bit, then steps down. And that'll be darker. And now we kind of just finish that off by coming down the edge of our bastion of stone that's supporting this massive vertical volume of orthogonal rectangular space inside. So we do the same for each of our flying buttresses. That outside edge, which kind of defines that, is stronger than the one that's closer to us. And then we'll drop this down a little bit and we'll show each little arch that comes and springs from that. So you can see that actually they realized that we didn't have to make that a whole plane of space because all we're doing is we're driving the force through this line and then down through a column, so you can carve out the base of that and it still works just as well. And that'll drop down to this plinth and we'll see that change. And so just in terms of the sketch format, we'll come back into the lights behind it, the windows, and drop a little bit of tone in there. Just to get a sense of how it's deep and dark within that skin. Add a line there for the guttering of the roof. And then we'll probably come to the edge of the transept and have that pull off the paper more. These two towers defining that kind of edge. This one isn't as dominant because this one actually has space on the other side of it. So that'll drop down and that'll help pull it off of the continuing apse. And I believe there's a couple of arched windows on this skin as well. And there's more definition to the sculpture and decoration for all this. And again, this is a quick half-hour, 45-minute sketch of a building that's enormously detailed. So you could do a sketch just of this. You could do a sketch just of that, just of the front elevation, just as a portal, and the same amount of information could be in that sketch. So we're trying to keep this more about just the general qualities for now of Notre Dame. So within our rose window, we'll show just a little bit of change of value for some of the elements to show that that is indeed an interior space behind that all stained glass in there. There's a circular detailed piece of stonework up there as well. And then we'll come back in because over the years, this being a different type of wrapping or coating for that, I believe when they restore that too, it will also end up being a darker element than the skin itself. So we'll come on this side and kind of blacken that up a bit. And they will probably bring back the statue of Saint Denis out of, which will be part of the sculpture of the structure. And then up in the actual spire itself, in the flesh, there will be the reconstructed statue of the Restoration architect, Viollet-le-Duc, and you recognize him in a saintly-like pose, but he's holding a T-square to show that architectural language of his performance on the site. Okay, now we're going to do one last thing to kind of make this seem more sunlit. And so right now, I think you get a little bit of a sense, if I were to point it out to you now, it'll seem more obvious that this white of this paper seems brighter than this white of the paper. And it's the same piece of paper because it's got a darker gray coming up to the edge of it. So when you trap that edge with that change of value, it makes your original lighter tone seem more dominant. So we're going to do that, but now we're going to use sky to make the whole thing seem more luminous. So come back here on this edge, we'll make sure that's darker. And now we're going to sort of make a pretend pronounced atmospheric change coming from the north and moving south through Paris. And so we're simply going to wrap in a flight of clouds, which will come and kind of tease the edge of this. We're going to move it from the upper left of the drawing through the building to this side as well. And we'll come over to our quick little diagrammatic section. We'll have it come down and kind of touch the skin of the roof. And make sure it comes all the way up to the top, because our idea here is we want to shroud the entire white of Notre Dame with not a bright sky, but a sky of color or pre-storm like. And that way you can get some more dimension and movement out of the whole sketch to pull that diagram off the paper. And then we'll leave it go white over here because we got our two-dimensional piece, and just sort of graphically, we'll make this a dominant part and have it kind of trail out to 2D on the right. So having done that once, much like the floor plane down here in perspective, the ground plane has to be perceived as a plane that's beneath us, that's flat. The sky also really performs as a flat plane. If we simply treat this as the same tone all the way down, we've created a wall and ends up being a vertical plane. So we have to come back in and show more pattern, more depth right above us, where there's more information that's close to us. So the clouds are stronger and they're deeper, but it's the same sort of approaching storm that's further away here, but our lines are getting closer together. So it seems like these clouds are moving in a plane back from the north coming this way. And so we want to have this idea of the entire cloud being kind of above us here, but then the same cloud, the same size and the same part of the atmosphere is done in much less space in the distance and a much less after that. So now all of a sudden it seems like there's a plane of things going back, passing over Notre Dame, and not just a curtain being pulled behind it. And we pull a little bit of that horizontal movement right through the tower. So we see it's a consistent movement in the sketch they're moving across. And maybe a little trail over here down to the east. And obviously the darker you make that connection, the more value the white will be that's adjacent to it. So if we really push it in here to the neck between the two towers, it makes this piece very brilliant as well, not only just the corner tower itself. So you can control not only where the sun comes from, but you can control its intensity. And that's by moving through your sketching through not just the darkness of the pencil, but the middle grays, the softer grays, the harder grays, and leaving the page paper white when you want to accent things. So you can put a little windows in there, in the front. And the trees cast a shadow. And then that for today is Our Lady of Paris from 1163.